Hello, my spookies! It's your host and narrator, Henrique Couto, here with a very special compilation of the best and scariest stories from Weekly Spooky to make sure you start your May on the right, bloody, severed foot. So get comfortable because these are 5 terror tales, and they all have one thing in common: the idea and the fact that monsters stalk the world of man. So, get comfortable. Make sure your earbuds aren't blocking your ability to hear any howls or scratching at your back door. And make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcasting app, because every single Wednesday, there's a brand new story to enjoy. Tonight is just a sampling of over 300 episodes, so kick back and enjoy. The God Tongue by Dan Wilder. Born without a tongue to grant him the power of speech, Ezra had long been the target of derision by his peers. So much so that when his beloved mother had breathed her last, he abandoned the home in which he was raised and took to the hills and forests that bordered the microcosm of the world's backwoods notions that was the town of Jaden's Cross. Once there, Ezra built himself a modest cabin financed with his meager inheritance, where he could find solace away from the chorus of mocking voices. Living off the land, Ezra killed only that which he could consume, and his growling stomach, coupled with his barren icebox, had told him it was high time to venture out into the crisp autumnal evening. After long, fruitless hours, Ezra had seen nary a hint of prey, and though the moon hung swollen in the sky, a mist had begun to encroach upon the landscape of stoic pines that pointed like accusing fingers at the heavens. Ezra exhaled wearily and sat down at the base of the nearest pine. The miasma played seductively at his neck and chin, causing his skin to turn to gooseflesh as the fog was a great deal cooler than the air that surrounded it. Ezra closed his eyes for a moment and let the symphony of the forest fill his ears. And, for minutes, it did just that, until his placid repose was shattered by the sound of a twig breaking that echoed through the cool air like the report of a shotgun being discharged. Ezra's eyes snapped open, and, as his gaze furtively darted to and fro, he spied majestic antlers rising from the fog. In a fluid motion, he rose to his feet and brought the sight of his Remington rifle to bear on the dark shape that stood just below the mist. Ezra squeezed the trigger, sending fire and thunder forth into the night, and as soon as they appeared, the antlers fell. He bolted forward through the swirling gray, which seemed to recoil from his advancing form as if fearful of his presence to his quarry. As he approached, the fog had now parted and refused to trespass where the beast lay. And while Ezra was unable to give voice to his shock, his slack jaw and bulging eyes more than conveyed his emotions, for while he expected to find a stag, he instead found a caricature of a man, albeit a man with antlers. Ezra kneeled and rolled the creature on its back. Its lifeless eyes were large, dark, and set wide upon a face covered in coarse fur. It wore little in the way of clothing, just a simple robe from which extended limbs that resembled a dog's leg, that ended in long, tapered fingers tipped with crimson nails. It was in one such appendage that the creature clutched what at first appeared to Ezra to be a smooth ebony stone. He reached for the object and found it malleable and warm, more flesh than mineral. As he turned the artifact over and over in his palm, the mist began to slowly creep back, and with it came the inhuman wailing. Ezra panicked as the mist around him produced its litany of grief, which resulted in a mad flight through the dense pines. As he ran, Ezra could feel the miasma strike his legs as it began to solidify into long, lashing tendrils. As if that wasn't disconcerting enough, the wailing had now transformed into protracted screams of pure rage. Onward he flew, tripping and struggling as the fog continued its battery. Finally, he saw the familiar outline of his cabin in the clearing just beyond the forest. He threw his weight against the unlocked front door and exploded into his domain. In an instant, he slammed shut the door, threw the bolt into place, and collapsed to the floor in a crumpled mass of pure exhaustion. He sat for minutes as hot tears ran down his cheeks and his heart beat so fast and hard that at any other time he would have been sure he was having a heart attack. Indeed, his hammering pulse was all he could hear, and it was that fact that made him realize that whatever outre abominations he had left behind in the woods, they had decided not to stray from that realm. Finally, he gained control of his faculties, moving his hands to his face to rub the last vestiges of tears from his eyes. Ezra realized he still clutched that preternatural stone, and where once it was merely matte black, now it glowed a brilliant gold from 1,000 hairline cracks that crossed its surface like arteries no wider than a human hair. Ezra was entranced by the artifact, so entranced he failed to notice the mist that had crept ever closer along the floorboards as it issued forth from the small wood-burning stove behind him. Ever onward it came, crawling up his back until finally it plunged deep into his brain via his left ear canal. Ezra's brain exploded with 1,000 images of a history, not his own. He saw an endless array of beings, more beast than man, hideous and beautiful in equal measure. He floated onward through a great city beneath the forest floor. Finally, he saw a diaphanous stag, over 20 feet high, its head adorned with 7 sets of antlers. The image swirled and rippled as the sight of that ebony edifice he held filled his field of vision. Ezra felt his arm move of its own accord, and while he struggled to make it remain at rest, he was powerless to stop its ascent or the action which followed. His hand simply placed the glowing midnight-hued object into his mouth, which had mechanically opened to accept it. For the briefest of seconds he could taste infinity, and with that he could feel a new organ grow inside him. A tongue, which pulsed and throbbed within his mouth. His first words were a scream. Then came blackness.
"You murdered the historian. You must take his place."
The voice echoed so loud in his mind that it snapped him awake. Ezra found himself lying on the cold floor of his cabin. "Historian?" he said involuntarily. His eyes grew wide as the memory of the dark tongue which had replaced his own missing organ flowed into his head. With a start, he lifted himself from the floor and sped to the bathroom. Examining himself in the mirror, he opened his mouth to view that demon tissue, which he seemed to know by some arcane intuition was connected to that ancient stag. There sat the obsidian stone-like mass of the previous night, but now it pulsed and throbbed with an unearthly power which flowed through those golden veins, which now had spread throughout the interior of his mouth. Ezra began clawing at the offending member, but to no avail. The flesh, though supple, was completely unyielding. His thoughts locked upon its removal. Ezra ran to the kitchen to procure a large steak knife. As he steeled his nerves, Ezra stuck out his tongue and brought the blade into place for the amputation. The air split with static before he could begin that dreaded surgery. The small shortwave radio, his one mechanical distraction which provided for him a chance to voyeuristically listen to the voices of others without being pressed to respond in kind, had come to life from its home atop his rough-hewn dining room table. As he dashed into the room, his eyes beheld yet another incomprehensible sight. The mist now solidified into the contours of a vaguely humanoid shape, save for the long horns protruding from its incorporeal forehead. It hunched over the device and exhaled streams of vapor directly into the microphone. From somewhere that sounded both close and at the opposite end of the galaxy came a sound that at first was not unlike the purring of a large cat, but quickly turned into a low, guttural growl before finally becoming words that simply could not have been formed by human lips.
"Pass on, old friend. We are coming."
Ezra reached for the figure, which dissipated into the ether at his touch, accompanied by a chorus of melodic laughter. He grabbed for the microphone in one hand, and with the other tried furiously to find the proper channel to connect him with the one agency he felt would be able to help him fend off whatever malevolence was creeping his way. The town militia of Jaden's Cross. Finally, he arrived at the proper frequency, and parted his dry lips to do that which had eluded him, these many years. Pressing the button which would allow his voice to travel the waves, Ezra began to speak. What followed was not one voice, but legion. Some were mere growls, others came like gently chirping birds, and a few were close to human, yet still possessing a preternatural timbre. But above all rang the impossibly deep tones of their god. For the stag did speak, the great animal whose voice was known when the universe was a mere speck of dust hanging like a mote in the eye of infinity. With that, the radio exploded in a shower of acrid smoke and sparks that knocked Ezra to the floor. Ezra began to weep, yet the sound of crying that issued from his mouth was again the product of that unholy throng. Unable to retain his tenuous grasp on sanity, he was determined to rip the organ from his mouth with his bare hands that he noticed were covered in runes and glyphs carved deep upon the surface of his skin. Furiously he flew again to the bathroom, where he exhaled in shock at the face that met his gaze within the mirror. Like his hands and every other scrap of visible flesh, he was covered in those strange markings. Ezra clawed at the skin, which gave way in thin sheets to reveal layers of fresh dermis below marked the same as the skin above. He attempted to scream, but what came instead was the shouting of every supernatural being that had ever or will ever walk the earth, all proclaiming their name to the midnight that lie just beyond the cabin's roof. Ezra ran towards the door of the cabin, the ancient instinct to flee that which we do not, or simply cannot understand, overtaking him. But suddenly, he could move forward no more, as that demon mist once more held him firm where it issued from between the floorboards of the cabin to solidify into its humanoid form, the shifting arms of which wrapped tightly around its panic-stricken prey.
"You murdered me,"
it whispered seductively.
"Now you shall walk eternally into that resplendent ebony with your brethren."
Ezra struggled for a moment until a sound, distant at first yet growing ever nearer, began to fill the room. The pounding of hooves upon cold ground. The front door exploded in a maelstrom of splinters as a menagerie appeared that was equal parts animal and man, and the worst of both, Ezra once again succumbed to the ebon darkness. Over the next hours, Ezra would occasionally regain consciousness, and while the moonlight illuminated only endless miles of forest, it also revealed the talon-tipped hands that held him aloft, as well as the nightmares they belonged to. Finally, he came to. The group had stopped before a long-forgotten farmhouse. Even in the waning moonlight, the house looked impossibly ancient and beyond any hope of repair. One of the creatures to his left loped forward and threw open the large storm doors, whose hinges creaked and protested and led Ezra down into the darkness. They walked for what seemed several minutes through the inky blackness. Occasionally, Ezra could swear that he felt hot breath on the back of his neck, or a gentle touch of something inhuman reaching toward him from the darkness. Soon in the distance a faint light could be seen, which grew brighter and brighter, until Ezra could make out the lithe silhouette of his guide. They arrived in a large circular room which was carved from the earth itself. A multitude of doorways dotted the walls, and in the darkness of each, Ezra could see indescribable shapes moving ever closer in the light. Finally, all were revealed as creatures which may have been constructed of wild daydreams, absinthe visions, and children's chalk drawings gathered in the chamber. Ezra shrunk under their gaze, for here, as in the world above, he felt the outsider.
"Say hello to your new family,"
something croaked from the assemblage. A being, more owl than man, stepped from the crowd and stared at Ezra for what seemed like days. As it looked, it would crane its head from side to side and snap its great beak open and shut. Ezra stood, stock still. Suddenly, It dawned on him that the beast wasn't figuring out the best way to pluck out his eyes. Rather, it was reading the glyphs that adorned his face. He gasped as the owl spoke.
You tell the story of my family?
Ezra could only stare at the being, dumbfounded.
No,
came a voice from the throng.
He tells the tale of the fleet claws. I can read it even from here. And the moon wraiths,
came a response from the crowd.
No, he tells the story of us all. Look!
Ezra looked down at his hands, which had started to unravel into long flesh scrolls which were soon picked up by the discolored fingers, talons, and tentacles, the owners of which read aloud and babbled excitedly of the stories contained therein, of their sacred lineage, as well as their futures. Soon Ezra was unraveling from every piece of exposed skin, some of which drifted to the ground as torn pages from an ancient tome. More creatures arrived and picked up the pages, laughing as they celebrated all that made them. Onward and onward the pages and scrolls fell, until finally all that was left of Ezra were the pages themselves. Each tribesman held a page or scroll of their own, and each cherished the sacred words they contained.
The stranger came to speak to us all, and what words he has brought us.
The Beast of Roca di Vaca by Morgan Moore. All right, kids, everybody going to Ranch Roca di Vaca, be on the bus in 5 minutes, the teacher shouted through a megaphone to a parking lot full of kids and their parents. This year, the decision for a class trip included a weekend at a ranch to learn more about agriculture and the kind of self-operated business that were most common in the surrounding area. While there were a number of ranches within the same area, Ranch Roca di Vaca stood out for being run by immigrants from Puerto Rico. To both the parents and the teachers, this meant the kids could learn not only about agriculture, but also about another culture as well. In the hustle and bustle of all the kids and adults getting everything ready, Patrick Adams stood with a group of his friends. Patrick was excited to go on the trip, especially since it gave him a weekend away from his parents. He loved his parents, but he was also 12 years old and was at that age when he needed time away from his folks to be on his own every so often. Man, I can't wait to get out of this parking lot. No parents for a whole weekend, Sean, one of Patrick's friends, said with excitement. Yeah, but we'll have Mr. Osborne and Mr. Riley as chaperones, plus all the people at the ranch, Tommy, another friend, mentioned. Hey, I'll take it. At least they'll let us explore and have fun. Unlike our parents, Sean replied. Guys, Patrick started to say, a smile on his face. It doesn't matter who is or isn't with us. All that matters is no classes and no parents for the next 4 days. His friends shrugged and nodded their heads in agreement. The three of them knew they'd do some schoolwork over the course of the trip, but the knowledge that it wouldn't completely be like school was something they were happy about. It was a kid's dream. Last call, everybody on the bus if you want to go to the ranch. Another announcement came from the teacher, getting the attention of everybody in the lot. Parents gave their children final farewells as well as telling them to have fun and be safe. Patrick and his friends said their goodbyes to their parents and started to head towards the bus. The ride to the ranch took a couple of hours, and once there, the children were directed over to an area by a barn. In front of the barn stood an older man dressed in traditional ranching garb, with a dog sitting beside him. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael, and this here is Picasso. Welcome to Ranch Roca di Vaca. We're excited to have you all here, and we hope that you will all have a fun time. The kids cheered loudly with excitement, as the teachers clapped and cheered with them, though not as energetic. Michael smiled and bowed his head in thanks. Thank you very much. Now, before we get all you kids settled into your rooms, we just want to set a few ground rules. First of all, you can see this is a big area with a lot of open land. We ask that while you stay with us, you not explore outside of the fenced areas at all. And that if you must venture out that way for any reason, make sure you have an adult with you. Being outside at night goes with that as well. Other than that, I hope that you all have a good time, and we'll see you later tonight for a campfire. Once night had fallen, everybody met back up at the location Michael told them to for the campfire. It was a fun time with hot dogs, s'mores, roasted corn, perfect for kids that had been cooped up all day with just snack food. Picasso went up to everybody and sniffed at them, trying to get some food before Michael called him back to his side. After everybody had eaten, Michael stood up from his seat and whistled, calling all the children to attention. "You guys enjoy dinner?" he asked, getting a thunderous applause in return. "Well, I'm glad to hear that. Would you all like a story? Assuming, y'all can handle it." The kids screamed at the man in front of them, demanding the story and promising that they wouldn't be scared. After a minute or two, the kids quieted down, ready for the story they were promised. Many years ago, back in Puerto Rico, on a ranch not too different from this one, my grandpa started to lose some of his livestock. Goats, cows, pigs, just about everything he had started to disappear. And when the animals would be found, they were dead and drained of blood. A couple weeks later, my grandpa went out with some buddies one night who also happened to be ranchers. As the night went on, my grandfather asked if any of them had experienced anything similar to what was going on at his ranch. To his surprise, they all had been dealing with the same things. Well, at least one of his friends had an idea. He claimed that it was a monster. Now, as one might expect, everybody in the room laughed at that point. But he stuck to it, saying that this sort of thing happened years ago, but suddenly stopped. Because of its affinity for goats, he named the beast El Chupacabra, the goat sucker. Sure enough, the animals suddenly stopped disappearing. Now for me, I'm not too sure about it all, but you never know. After all, why do you think we don't want you guys going out alone at night? Michael grinned as he finished his story, and an animal howled in the distance. The kids looked shaken a bit. The teachers, too. A moment later came another howl cutting through the night air, which caused the group to jump. Their host and storyteller laughed a little at the reaction the kids had from the multiple howls. "No need to worry about those howls, boys and girls. That's the dogs we keep on the ranch to keep the animals in line. No El Chupacabras here." Taking his words to heart, everybody got up and headed off to bed after taking care of the fire. The next day brought hours of learning how the farm was run, a huge lunch spread, and hours of horseback riding, after which everyone was excited for another campfire. But once they got close enough to the ranch, everyone could see that something wasn't quite right. A ranch hand ran over to Michael, distraught. "Boss, it's terrible, just terrible," the ranch hand blurted out, feverishly. "What is it?" Michael replied, his voice remaining calm. "There's a hole in the fence where the goats and the pigs sleep and... The worker spurted out in a slight mumble. "Well, come on, what is it?" Michael said in a tone that was both commanding and now starting to be tinged with concern. "They're dead. All dead," he spat out. Michael found himself dumbstruck, and the kids were speechless, their faces twisting into horrific expressions. Without hesitating, Michael rode off towards the area the ranch hand had described, while the hand motioned the children towards the stable and instructed them to return to their rooms. Patrick was very concerned. After all, animals just dropping dead wasn't something that happened every day. He shared his concerns with Sean and Tommy, and while they did find it strange, it didn't seem to bother them or make them feel as weird as Patrick. Hopefully tomorrow would be a better day. Unfortunately for Patrick and the rest of the class, it was not a better day. All activities were canceled and the children were confined to the large dining area. Patrick managed to sneak away at one point and eavesdrop on his teachers, Michael, and some of the ranch staff standing just outside an open window. "What are we going to do?" Mr. Osborne asked. "Is there any way you and the children could leave early?" a female ranch hand asked. "No," Mr. Riley started. "Unfortunately, the bus won't be back until tomorrow morning. Unless you have something to transport all the kids and make the 100-mile round trip, we have to stay until 7 in the morning. "Well, that settles it then, doesn't it? Keep the children in their rooms for the remainder of the day. Only let them out for dinner. I'll have some of the workers stand guard by the doors. That way, if a child needs to go to the bathroom, they can have a chaperone. Tonight, me and some of the other workers will stay up to keep watch over the ranch." Michael spoke calmly, but seriously. The teachers nodded and Michael and his staff turned and left. I cannot believe this is happening. I thought the school said everything about this place checked out perfectly fine, Mr. Osborne asked his colleague. It did from what I saw. Besides, you can't control what goes on in nature, Mr. Riley replied with a sigh. You're right, but still, you would think they'd have this more under control. Almost all the animals are dead. Drained of their blood, it's just weird, Mr. Osborne mused. You've got that right, Mr. Riley said. The two then walked off, continuing to talk as they went. No way, Tommy said after Patrick finished telling him and Sean what he'd overheard. Yeah, Patrick, there's no way a monster is responsible for everything going on, Sean chimed in. Come on, guys. It would be one thing if they dropped dead, but I heard them say there was no blood at all, Patrick retorted. It could just be some wild animal that broke in, Sean offered as a potential explanation. Okay, so it is a wild animal, but the fences are made up of barbed wire. If any animal broke in to kill the livestock, it would have been cut from the wire. No blood, remember? Patrick shot back. All right, so it is that Chupacabra monster. Why does it matter to us? If we're just going to be stuck here all day, then we'll be safe, Tommy said. Because wouldn't it be cool to say you saw a monster? Patrick asked. I mean, yeah, but nobody would believe us. You would have to have photographic proof. Wait, no way, Patrick, Tommy said, figuring out his friend's plan. Come on, Tommy, it's simple. We just hide after dinner so we don't get locked in here. We bring your camera with us and we go on a little monster hunt. Once we get our proof, we run off and sneak back into our room. There's nothing to worry about, Patrick explained to the two of them. Pat, that sounds really dangerous. I mean, if there is a monster, what could it do to us? Plus, we'd get in loads of trouble if any of the ranchers caught us, Sean mused. We're going back tomorrow. What possible trouble could we get in? I think you guys are just scared. You guys want to join me and have some fun before we go home, or do you want to just stay in here bored out of your minds? Patrick asked. His friends looked at him, and then at each other. After a few minutes of silence, the two spoke up together. Okay, we're in. That night, the boys put their plan into action. The tricky part was figuring out how to stay under the radar so that they didn't get sent back to their room after dinner. Patrick, Tommy, and Sean decided to leave dinner early and head back to their rooms ahead of everybody else. Once they were outside, the three boys carefully made their way into one of the barns and hid by a pile of hay and began to wait. Through the cracks in the walls of the barn, they could see the light shining in from outside, and, once the light faded completely into darkness, they emerged from their hiding spot. When they exited the barn, the calmness of the night sent a shiver down their collective spines. None of them were afraid of the dark, but being on the ranch at night, while a monstrous creature might be on the prowl, was something that put all three of them on edge. Patrick took the lead, brandishing a flashlight he swiped earlier from a storage closet in the building where the rooms were. He turned it on and looked at Tommy and Sean, who returned his gaze. The three boys nodded and then started to make their way around the ranch. They moved slowly and carefully, making sure they weren't spotted by any workers, but also making sure they didn't miss anything. This is boring, Sean whispered. Be quiet, Tommy whispered back. Back at ya, Sean responded. Both of you, shut up, Patrick shot at the two of them. The trio continued to make their way around the ranch, not wanting to potentially have missed anything. After the second walkthrough, they agreed that there was clearly nothing going on and decided it was time to head back. When they reached the front of their building, they stopped for a bit. Well, that was a whole lot of nothing, Sean stated, yawning afterwards. I gotta admit, Pat, that was pretty pointless. Look, I know the way those animals died is weird, but we searched the whole ranch, twice. It isn't a monster, Tommy said. Patrick sighed and shrugged a little bit. I guess you guys were right. Sorry I kept you both up. But hey, at least we didn't get into trouble. Let's go to bed. The three boys started to open the door, but they stopped when a horrible shriek filled the night. They looked at each other in shock. Without hesitating, they raced to where they thought the noise originated from. As they got closer, Patrick went to raise the flashlight, stopping in sudden terror when he saw what was in front of him. The suddenness of his stopping caused Sean and Tommy to crash into him. The trio tumbled to the ground, sending the flashlight rolling away. When they looked up towards where the light shone, all three of them started in terror. In front of them was a creature squatting over a dog, licking its lips. The beast looked like a mutated mixture of a wolf and a bat, a sharp spike-like spine poking out from its back, its eyes glowing deep crimson. This creature, this thing, matched Michael's description of El Chupacabra. Patrick, Sean, and Tommy stood up slowly, fear taking over their bodies. The monster roared and started towards the boys. They ran, taking off as fast as they could. El Chupacabra roaring again and gaining on them quicker than they expected. So quick, in fact, it passed them and stopped in front of them, standing up in its full height, drooling and growling like a dog interrupted from eating. All three boys stopped suddenly again, sweating bullets with every nerve in their body on full alert. The monster started to walk towards them slowly, eyeing up its new prey. They wanted to run. They needed to run, but the fear paralyzed them in place. Tommy, Sean, and Patrick could think of nothing, do nothing. They were simply stuck with the towering, unholy creature in front of them. Suddenly, Picasso came rushing from behind them and jumped on the beast. The dog bit into the neck of its enemy and shook its head, digging in as much as it could. It seemed to work as El Chupacabra cried out in pain. However, it didn't work for long as it ripped the dog away from its neck before taking a bite out of it. El Chupacabra threw the dog away like a piece of garbage. Picasso hit the wall of the building and fell to the ground, staying there, motionless. The beast turned its eyes back towards the boys. This time, though, they had enough of their wits about them to start running again. The monster chased after them. Everywhere they went, the monster followed, cutting them off time after time. Patrick, Sean, and Tommy somehow managed to always pivot at the last minute, the beast shrieking in anger each time. Barks soon began to fill the night as the sound of the beast stirred the security dogs, soon joined by voices echoing behind them in Spanish. "We need to get inside! Anywhere!" Tommy screamed feverishly at his friends. The boys darted into the first building they saw, a small barn filled with farming equipment. El Chupacabra stormed in after them, ripping the doors off their hinges. It roared at them and once more began to move towards them. Patrick and his friends backed away from it slowly, grabbing anything they could to throw at what was in front of them, though none of it had any effect on the monster. Soon they found themselves backed against a table, each boy feeling around for something to use as a weapon, though their efforts proved fruitless. With the creature almost right in their faces, they came to the conclusion that this was it. This was where everything was to end. A bang shot through the barn, and El Chupacabra swung its body around. Michael stood there, holding a shotgun aimed at the monster. It rushed at Michael and slammed him down to the ground, then kicked him away. Michael crashed into the metal wall of the building, leaving behind a dent. As the creature was about to go in for the final blow, Picasso slammed into the leg of the beast and started tearing at its leg. The dog let go and backed up as its opponent shrieked. Picasso rushed at the thing, and the two went tumbling to the ground, biting at each other ferociously. Sean and Tommy sprinted over towards Michael, screaming out for help. Patrick, however, ran after the two fighting animals. He found where they were, but was unable to see the combat clearly thanks to the frenzy. Growls, barks, shrieks, and cries filled the air in equal measure as dirt flew everywhere. Finally, they backed away from each other, wheezing and breathing heavily, staring each other down, before exploding into violence once more. Patrick cried out and ran back to where Michael and his friends were. Once there, he found Michael was on his feet, Sean and Tommy by his side. "The workers are calling the police and arming themselves. Come on, let's get to safety," Michael told the boys. "But what about Picasso? He's still fighting that thing," Patrick stammered out in a worried tone. Michael looked at him, gulping a bit. He had forgotten that his dog had saved him from certain doom. The man knew he had to get to safety, to get the boys to safety, but he couldn't just abandon his friend. Without any more thought, Michael picked up the shotgun and ran off towards where Patrick had come from. Patrick and the boys followed after him. They stopped once they got to where Michael was standing, clearly in shock. When the boys looked where he was, they too became shocked. In front of them stood Picasso, covered in dirt, wounded and weak. On the ground was the monster, the beast, El Chupacabra, defeated. The next morning, the kids lined up to get on the bus to take them back home. Patrick and his friends stood beside Michael, who was all smiles and warm spirits as he said goodbye and waved at the various children. Picasso stood next to them as well, bandaged from his fight. When it came time for Sean, Tommy, and Patrick to board the bus, Michael looked at them, his smile still there, but he now appeared weary. "Thank you, boys, for all your help," Michael told them. "Hey, it's thanks to you and Picasso that we were even able to be any help," Patrick responded, patting Picasso's head. "Yeah, but what happened? You sent us back to our room before the police or your workers came to help. Did they see the monster?" Tommy asked curiously as Sean nodded in agreement. Michael's smile faded, and he took a deep breath. "They didn't. I told Picasso here to drag the body away. When they were out of sight, I fired my gun and told everybody that it was a wolf. I said I shot at it and that it ran off afterwards." "But what about the damage to the barn and the wall?" Sean questioned. "I told them that the wolf and Picasso caused the damage with how violently they were fighting. As for the wall, well, a wolf charging at you at full speed and slamming you into a wall is going to leave some kind of an impact, especially considering how big I am. Besides, that was an older building, so its walls weren't as strong as the others. Anyways, after the police came and everything died down, I had Picasso show me where he took the thing and buried it myself," Michael explained. "Last call! All students on the bus! Pronto!" Mr. Osborne announced through a megaphone. Michael patted the boys on their respective shoulders. "Go on now. You don't want to be late." He smiled at them as he spoke. They smiled back and picked up their bags and started to walk towards the bus. When they got there, Sean entered first and then Tommy. Patrick started to enter the bus but stopped. He turned around and waved at Michael again. Patrick's eyes then moved downwards to Picasso, and he smiled at the dog. The dog wagged its tail and barked happily at the boy. But as Patrick started to turn back around, he stopped. Something caught his eye. He turned back around and looked once more at Picasso, and his eyes widened in surprise and growing horror. Picasso's eyes glowed a deep crimson.
Old Bones by Joe Solmo.
Old Bones is what my grandpa used to call him back in the days of black and white TVs. I've never seen him myself, but I was sure he existed. Nothing scared my grandfather. Nothing but Old Bones, that is. Most of the local folk will tell you they seen Old Bones here or there, but most of them are full of shit. For a while, one of them TV crews came in and filmed the town telling stories, but that's all they were. Shit, even Farmer Kendrick over on Route 70 had a story, and that son of a bitch never left his house. His fields were all overgrown like 70s bush. Our family, and the neighbors next door, we had a special deal, my grandfather said. Our lands butted up with the state forest, but Pappy called that his territory. He told us we could hunt in there, but we had to leave the first kill for Old Bones. Kind of a sacrifice of sorts. An offering so he would leave us alone when we were out there as long as we didn't cross the markings along the creek. We would shoot a nice buck and have to leave it in the clearing. It pissed me off, but not enough to cross Old Bones. Usually a day or so later we'd find the carcass. Most of the meat gone, strung up in the damned trees of all places. Could it be a mountain lion? They are around, but rare, and I've never seen one in these parts. But I have seen the tracks of Old Bones left under the tree. I would ask my grandfather all the time what Old Bones looks like. He'd always say if I ever saw him, I was sure to shit my pants and run if I was lucky. Not very descriptive, I know. I pressed him once, when he took me hunting on my 16th birthday. He had gotten me a nice .30-06 and we had sighted it in the night before. He had gone hunting without me 2 days prior and gave up an offering to Old Bones, so my kill would be ours. We reached the tree where he had lain our buck, and we saw the tracks come into the clearing, as fresh as this morning. Big tracks, looking like a giant moose's print. We get moose now and again in northern New York, but I've never seen a bull that big. The tracks were over a foot long, twice as big as I've ever seen myself in these here woods. Is Old Bones just a big moose? Is that what you're afraid of? I asked him. Don't be simple, boy. There ain't a moose I'd run from when I got a loaded rifle, was his reply as I studied those tracks. The left track had a bit of a crack in it, like the foot had an old injury. The right one dragged just a bit in the dirt. Then it hit me. There were only 2 legs? He stands up like we do? I asked, looking at the circular hole in the ground an inch or so deep. There seemed to be one every 20 feet or so. Sometimes there was a little bit of a drag there as well. What could it be? Never mind how he stands. Just give him no reason to come looking for you, and you'll be just fine, he told me as he placed his hand on my shoulder. He had lost a foot a long time ago, and the artificial one never quite was comfortable for him. But it wasn't an inconvenience enough for him to keep from taking care of the deal with Old Bones. I kept my eyes peeled that trip, but never got a peek at Old Bones, even though I got the feeling something was peeping on me. But then again, I always got that feeling when I was in those woods. The deeper in, the darker the forest got. Some of those trees were 100 feet tall or more. The old-growth forest kept out all but the most persistent sunlight. It was the best hunting ground most of the time, but once in a while, there wouldn't be a damn thing around. No birds, no game, nothing. Just dead silence in the forest. On those trips, we learned to give up early and come home. We'd have better luck another time. My Uncle Jim once said he caught a glimpse of what had to be Old Bones. It was a foggy morning, and he said the forest just got real quiet-like. He stood still as the hair raised on the back of his neck. He said he knew Old Bones was near because the rest of the animals had the good sense to fuck off somewhere else. He stood there, peering into the forest, and he said standing next to a large pine tree was Old Bones, about 50 yards out, barely perceptible in the fog. He said it slid through the forest, its great limbs having no problem as it traversed the uneven forest floor. He was too scared to get a closer look. He said it stopped between the trees and sniffed the air for a moment. 2 large sniffs before turning to face my uncle. He said its eyes smoldered even in the fog, cutting through. It stared a hole into him for about 10 seconds or so, before nodding and moving on through the forest. Uncle Jim said he sat there waiting for Old Bones to go on about his business. Whether he was too scared or was playing it smart was anyone's guess. He listened as the thing moved through the forest, creaking branches and heavy footfalls fading into the distance. He told me Old Bones was tall, like really tall, and if he didn't move, he would have mistaken him for a tree at that distance. I asked him if he saw a Bigfoot, and he told me it was nothing like that. He said it was something older. Much older. Now, I must tell you, Uncle Jim was a drinker, but we'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt, since he doesn't usually drink in the AM. He died about a month after that, so we can't ask him now. The neighbor boy Neil saw him once. We didn't believe him at first on account of the kid is slow in the head, but I guess his eyes worked just fine. His daddy came running over all excited to talk to my father about it. I watched him from the doorway to my room because it was past my bedtime. It was the 2nd week of deer season, but neither family had managed to get out there yet. He said Neil was out back of the house putting away his toys because a fog had rolled in, and his mother was worried he would get lost out there. Said it was standing there, next to the barn, looking at him, its eyes burning straight into his soul. Neil pissed himself and started to cry. I listened as he described Old Bones to my dad from Neil's account. It was almost as tall as the gable roof on the old 2-story barn they had. Said it just stared at him until his mom came out of the screen door looking for him. That thing hadn't been oiled in ages. The creek probably scared him off, if you ask me. Anyway, they said it took long strides and moved off into the woods past the field behind the barn, taking one of their sheep with it. Held it in one large hand. That was the last time one of our families didn't get Old Bones some meat on opening day, let me tell you. It didn't hurt to offer up some other times as well. It never went to waste. Old Bones always found what we left for him. Was it a creature or a man? I may never find out myself, and I think I'm okay with that. I was fascinated as a kid, but after everyone's stories, I think I'm good, you know? As an adult, I really don't want nothing to do with it. But that's not always my choice now, is it? I wanted to let you know that about 10 or so years ago, there was a couple of campers that went out there and went too far, crossing Old Bones Creek without any regard or offering. They really didn't know any better, mind you. Like they say, ignorance is no excuse. The search party never found them, but we sure did. Can you guess where? No? Up in the goddamn trees. I just wanted to let you know that you ain't the first. I looked over at the unlucky camper. He came to my door an hour ago seeking help because something got his friend out in the woods. I knew what it was. Old Bones. I almost felt bad for the guy until he told me his story. You cross the creek, you're fair game. But even that wasn't enough for this guy. You see, there are these totems out there. They kind of mark Old Bones' sacred grounds. This guy comes to my door seeking help and says they burned some weird carved wood for warmth last night. It had to be one of the totems for sure. These dumb pricks. Now I gotta march this asshole back into the woods at gunpoint because there's no reasoning with him. Gotta get him to the clearing and let Old Bones take him. You got a second gear there? You're awfully slow, I said. I don't understand why you're doing this. If you didn't want to help me, I could have gone somewhere else, the camper said to me. You gotta learn. That's not an option. You know what got your buddy? It was Old Bones. And Old Bones has a certain way of doing things. And damned if I'm gonna be the one to cross him. I've heard too many stories about what happens, I explained. What's Old Bones? The camper asked. It's everything. It's older than the forest. It is the forest. It's an inescapable hunger that roams these here woods, I told him. Yeah, but what is it? The annoying fuck asked. Around here, we say it's a god. We revere it. We take care of its needs, and it lets us hunt his land to feed our families. It really ain't nothing personal. I gotta make it right with Old Bones. I don't hate you or nothing, I said to the guy. Don't hate me? You're bringing me out into the woods at gunpoint to feed me to something you call a forest god. Don't hate me, but you're gonna just kill me? The camper yelled. First of all, I don't like that tone. And second of all, I don't have no choice in the matter. Old Bones will want the trespassers who entered his sacred groves and disturbed his totem. You sealed your own fate when you crossed the creek, I said. Just let me go. I got $800 in cash in my wallet. It's yours if you just let me go, the camper said. I shook my head at his stupidity. That money is already mine. Old Bones has no use for it. Hand it over, I said, pointing the barrel of that .30-06 I got so long ago at him. He sighed and handed over the cash. What did we learn here today? I asked. He just stared back at me with anger. We learned to keep our mouths shut, I finished for him. We walked further down the path my grandpa walked all those years ago. I knew it pretty well, but he knew it inside out. It's a shame he's gone. He would have gotten a kick out of this camper's predicament. I could hear the sound of the creek now. We were close. Once we reached it, the path followed it south for about a mile or so. Then comes the clearing. What's going to happen to me? The camper asked now that he had calmed down. Well, Old Bones will take you and open you up, gobble up the bits he wants, and whatever's left he'll toss into the trees. Why he does that, I don't know. Maybe to feed the birds. They gotta eat too, you know. I explained matter-of-factly to the camper, whose eyes grew larger with every word. "You're joking, right?" he asked me. I stopped on the trail and gave him a look. "What did Old Bones do to your friend?" I asked him. It pulled him right out of our tent. It was dark. I just heard the screaming. By the time I found the flashlight, there was nothing but a blood trail. I followed it for a bit, but then it just ended," the camper said, forlorn. "Did you look up in the trees?" I asked him. "Why the fuck would I do that?" he queried. "I bet that's where Old Bones stuck him, had his fill and tossed him to the clouds, like the early season stags we leave for him. Your friend is up in the branches, I'd bet you." "Well, I'll bet you $800, I joked with the camper. "You're demented, you know that, right? There's something off in your brain," the camper said. I smacked him with the barrel of the rifle and pointed it down the trail. For a second, I thought he was going to try something, but he gave up and started walking off. "Why should I keep going?" he said defiantly, and stopped in the path a moment later. "I'm gonna die either way. I'd rather get shot than ripped apart," he reasoned. "Well, it ain't your choice, son," I explained, and pointed yonder with the barrel of my gun. The clearing was just ahead. He looked like he was going to make a run for it, but I kept the barrel pointing right between his eyes. I figured he was bluffing anyway. I took him for a coward, and $800. "Get on in there by that stump," I commanded him. He waited a second or so before following his orders. I took the rope from my pocket and followed him over. I tied him up against the stump, eyeing the carvings on it. Grandpa said it was the natives that lived here a long time ago that carved into the stump. It sure was weathered enough. Grandpa said the carvings tell how to leave offerings for Old Bones. It's how our family figured it all out. Live food gets tied up, but the dead won't run away. I've never left live food before, but there's always a first time. I remember my grandpa telling my father how to do it when we came across a stag with a broken leg. It was crazy to try to grab the thing, but it had to have been struggling for days and was just tuckered out. We got it to the clearing, then they told me to leave, to go home and tell Mom they'd be back soon. I can still see my grandpa pointing to this very stump and explaining to my dad what to do. I first made the camper tie up his own feet at gunpoint. I didn't want him to kick me after all. That's what my kin did with the stag so many years ago. Then I tied his arms around the stump, with his chin resting on top in a little groove, facing deeper into the forest. I made sure he was good and tight before I stepped back and gave the clearing a look over. Only one more step left. I drew my knife and came up behind the hiker. "You're just going to leave me here with that thing in the woods?" the camper asked. "Yeah, that's the plan. Haven't you been paying attention? Look, man, I told you it's nothing personal. If I don't get the transgressor to Old Bones, then my family'll pay, and I can't have that," I said as I sliced into his flesh. Not too deep. Not in a vital spot, mind you. Just enough to make him bleed. To get the scent out into the air. To let Old Bones know we were ready. "You're a murderer!" the camper yelled out. "I ain't gonna murder you. That's for Old Bones to do," I explained. "Leaving me here is murdering me." "I ain't arguing semantics with a person that got himself tied up," I told him. "All you're saying is what you ain't going to do." "Well, what are you going to do then?" the camper asked me, followed by an exasperated sigh. Just then, Old Bones made himself known with a cry out in the forest, followed by the boom of a large footfall. I moved in front of the camper. "I'm gonna take my leave. Give my regards to Old Bones," I said, and turned towards the trail back home. "Don't fucking leave me!" he yelled as I left the clearing. I stopped and turned around. The footfalls from Old Bones were getting closer, really quick. I got myself an idea and ducked down in the small bushes that lined the clearing, peeking through at my offering. this might be a good chance to finally see what Old Bones looks like. I listened to the sound of the trees creaking as if they were making way for Old Bones to walk among them. In the distance, he could see the branches swaying. He could be here any moment. The hair on the back of my neck stood as a wave of chills ran through me. The camper started to scream as the primordial aura of Old Bones took over the clearing. All those years of wondering, all the stories from the townsfolk, even the bits and pieces of information I got from my own family couldn't prepare me for what I saw step into the clearing. It stood almost 20 feet tall, standing like a person would. Thick muscles adorned its body. There were parts where white bone was exposed in holes in the flesh. Its huge feet were cloven, just like the prints I had saw so long ago. The long arms were thin but strong. The left pushed off the trunk of a pine tree. The right clutched a gnarled walking staff made from some ancient wood. Resting on top of its shoulders was a huge head, a moose's head, scarred and scraped with countless years of existence. The large antlers had stains and scrapes as well. I tried to take it all in, but my eyes kept focusing on its gaze. The fires of Prometheus burned in the orbs as it looked down on the offering before it. It was like looking at a whacked-out moose version of a minotaur. Old Bones had a smell about him, like fresh-turned dirt. Just an earthy smell about him. It was like he was part of the forest. He blended in so well, except for those eyes, currently focused on the camper. It cocked its large head like a dog and raised the staff in the air. Old Bones poked the camper with the weathered end. When the camper screamed out in terror, Old Bones raised an eyebrow. He seemed pleased by the live offering. Even from my position, I could smell the piss on the camper. How disrespectful. With a large hand, Old Bones grabbed the camper and raised him into the air, snapping my ropes like they were nothing. He opened his large moose jaw. Inside weren't the teeth of a moose, but sharp fangs of a carnivore. It bit off the camper's head in a snap, and I nearly lost my lunch. I would have been sad, too. My wife makes a mean chicken salad. I watched as blood poured out the side of his mouth. He chewed on the head for a few seconds and swallowed. He huffed twice into the air. With a pointed finger, he dug into the chest and ate the organs by dumping the chest out all over his head into his mouth. A lung missed and splattered on the ground. It exploded like a water balloon. I retched and tried to keep it down. Old Bones must have heard me. Our eyes met for a second. The eons of burning earth before it had cooled branded my brain. I felt the ebb and flow of the magma below the crust. I thought I was going to die, that Old Bones was going to kill me. My own stupid need to see him was going to do me in. He tossed the camper's corpse into the air. It landed in the branches of the large pine trees. He picked up his staff and took a step towards me. I didn't have it in me to move. I was just trying not to break down. He took a massive step and was now in front of me.
Mortal,
Old Bones muttered. He commanded my attention. His voice came from nowhere, but from everywhere at the same time. The ember stare burned into my head.
I thank you for the offering. It has been some time since I have had flesh of a man. I think I would like some more. I forgot the taste of the arrogance of the young race. We need to amend the deal.
It spoke into my brain. No, humans are hard to get a hold of, and it's wrong, I replied. I can't do it.
Shame, mortal. If I do not receive a live offering of man flesh by the longest day of the year, then I shall take my payment from the farms.
Anything else, please, don't ask this of me, I begged.
I have spoken,
Old Bones said, and turned from me. He walked into the woods without another word. I looked at the camper in the trees, almost envying him, if I was being honest. Now I had to go home and explain to our families the new terms. We dare not go against Old Bones, not if we want to protect our loved ones. At least now I know what Old Bones looks like. If only I had left the clearing, I never would have seen Old Bones or interacted with him. Everyone that has seen Old Bones has had to pay a price, and mine will be paid in man flesh. The Creature from Richardson Lake by Charles Campbell. It was July in the valley, and it was one of the hottest summers on record, with daily temperatures averaging over 95 degrees, much hotter if you include the heat index. Sally Richardson was on register duty, taking money from the flock of patrons coming in to take a swim or sunbathe on the imported beach sand. Richardson's Lake had been open for business since the 1950s, and it was still as popular as it ever was. Sally was the great-granddaughter of Milo Richardson, the original owner of this redneck Riviera. Sally had a couple of cousins helping her run the place, along with a few Valley teenagers from Midland Valley High School's swim team. The days were mostly drama-free. The biggest issues they had, outside of bad weather here and there, were Valley kids trying to pass off the stamp on their hands from the day before as paid admission for that day. Sally had a system when stamping hands that involved many changing symbols and colors at the start of each swim day. Summer passes were also available, which some folks took advantage of, but most of them paid as they entered. Richardson's Lake was also a cash-only establishment, so they could be a little fudgy when it came to tax time. There was a hard and fast rule that everyone knew and no one broke until someone did. No swimming after sundown. Well, that should give you a hint of where we're going with this story. Some dumbass Valley kids ignored the rule one night, and this is what happened. Cecil Dalton had a cooler full of beer and a big pinch of Skoal in his gums. He was sitting on the front stoop of his mama's double-wide trailer, spitting tobacco juice as he waited. Then he saw Billy Frost's Jeep turn down Oak Street. Cecil leapt from the stoop and grabbed the cooler. Billy dimmed the Jeep lights when he approached. He wasn't sure if Cecil's mama cared if he went out this late or not. "Your mama home?" Billy asked. "Yeah, she's asleep. She don't give a shit where I go, so you're good," Cecil said with a grin. "Hey, Cece," Angie Renew shouted from the passenger seat. She was a hyper little thing, skinny as a string bean, and Billy was smitten with her. "Hey, little girl, guess you got shotgun," Cecil said. He smiled when he saw who was in the back seat. "Now, that ain't who I think it is it? Get on back here, Cece, and give me some sugar," hollered Mandy Hudson. Mandy was not skinny as a string bean. She was completely filled out in all the right ways. She had known Cecil since grammar school, and Mandy always loved flirting with her big teddy bear. Oh yeah, Cecil was an offensive lineman for the varsity football team at Midland Valley High. He climbed into the back of the Jeep, and she planted a big wet one right on his lips. "Ew, he's got a mouthful of that Skoal shit," Angie screamed when she heard the smooch. "I don't care. More flavor," Mandy replied. Angie glanced at her man and said, "Let's skedaddle." Billy obeyed, and the quartet headed to Warrensville, South Carolina, home of the Valley famous Richardson's Lake. Billy cut the lights when he approached the driveway to Richardson's Lake. They needed to be as quiet as they could because Sally's house was at the top of the hill, less than a quarter mile away from the swimming hole. Billy stopped short of the driveway and pulled the Jeep into a cutaway that was somewhat secluded, especially at night. It was a full moon, so they had that working for them. There were no lights on inside the confines of Richardson Lake. Cecil smiled when he noticed the moon's reflection in the still water. He wished he'd brought his fishing gear, but if the bass popped like he thought they would on a night like this, it wouldn't be long before the Warrenville PD were called to deal with late-night trespassers. "You bring the floats?" Billy asked Angie. "Yeah, you saw me put them in the Jeep. You bring the air pump? Because I ain't about to be blowing on floats for an hour," Angie shot back. "Well, floats ain't what I got in mind for you to blow. Billy, you better stop that sentence or it definitely won't happen." Angie cut him off as she winked at Mandy. Mandy was latched on to Cecil's arm. "Yeah, I got the air pump. Put some fresh batteries in it, too," Billy said. "Well, I got the most important thing here," Cecil said as he lifted the cooler full of beer. "I reckon everybody likes PBR. If you don't, you're SOL. "Good deal. Now, we can't be hooping and hollering when we get to the water. Sally does have a shotgun, and I know she ain't scared to use it. I'm sure it's just rock salt, but I have personally been hit with rock salt, and I think Cecil has too, if I remember right." Cecil shook his head in the affirmative. "And that shit hurts. She might pepper us with it before she calls the law, so we can swim, we can have some fun." He smiled at Angie. "But we need to keep it down. So no, we won't be playing chicken." "Got it," Mandy said. She dragged Cecil by the arm through the path. Richardson's Lake was mostly fenced in with the exception of a small break where a deer plowed through the wood the summer before. Sally hadn't gotten around to fixing it, and Billy noticed it a few Saturdays back when he and Angie swam beyond the yellow ropes, which got whistles galore from the Midland Valley High staffers. Angie had a beach bag full of towels and a couple of flattened floats. Billy grabbed the air pump and they followed Cecil and Mandy down the path. In the dark corner of Richardson's Lake, well beyond the yellow ropes that segregated the swimming hole, the creature raised its head from its meal. It stopped chewing on the very dead body of a fat copperhead to listen. The gills on the side of its neck flexed open before closing. The creature took in a deep breath of night air through the two slits it had for a nose. The scent made it drop what was left of the snake. Something tastier was just added to the menu. The creature slinked into the dark water and swam slowly toward the swimming hole. Cecil was sitting on a towel, chugging down his second PBR. Mandy was stuck to his side, drinking one of her own. Billy and Angie were quietly swimming. "I don't know why they don't open this place at night," Mandy said. "Yeah, it's pretty nice out here with the moon and all," Cecil replied. They heard Angie splash Billy, followed by a shh from Billy. "We're going to get hit with some rock salt, aren't we?" Mandy asked as she placed her head on Cecil's large shoulder. "Probably," Cecil answered, and finished off his beer before putting his arm around Mandy for a good squeeze. He loved the feel of her next to him. He couldn't imagine squeezing Angie like this. He figured she'd snap like a twig. "I want to jump off the diving board," Angie whined. "Absolutely not. You want to go to jail tonight?" Billy said. "No. Can we at least swim out to the big platform?" Angie asked, puffing out her lips. "Yeah, that we can do. We can even race if you want, but no shouting. I'll even give you a 30-second head start to make it fair," Billy finished. "Deal. So what do I get if I win?" Angie asked. "Well, I'll take you to that movie you've been begging me to see. That chick flick, The Wedding, or something or whatever." "It's called The Nuptials of Rosie and Blake," Angie corrected. When he heard that vomit-inducing title, Billy knew he had no choice but to win. "And if I win, we can revisit that blowing thing we were discussing earlier," Billy said. Angie rolled her eyes and counted down from 5 before she started furiously swimming for the platform. Billy stayed in place and began counting. He didn't realize how long 30 seconds could be, especially when it meant the possibility of a shitty chick flick in his immediate future. The creature stealthily approached the swimming hole. It was just beyond the yellow ropes, and it could see 2 of them in the water and 2 on the shore. It focused on the 2 in the water. The smaller one started swimming in the creature's direction. The creature dropped its head below the surface and tracked Angie's movement. She was coming toward it, and the creature began an intercept course. It could have moved swiftly and pulled her to the deep within seconds, but this creature was like a cat in one regard. It liked to play with its food. Billy was almost to 30, and although it wasn't super loud, he could hear the steady rhythm of Angie moving her arms and legs. She had quite the lead with the 30-second head start, and Billy seriously doubted he could make up the time. He was just about resigned to defeat. Then the count was at 30, and Billy took off like a speedboat. Angie could see the platform just ahead, and she could hear Billy slicing through the water some distance behind her. He sounded fast, no doubt spurred on by the reward she didn't exactly promise him, but would give him anyway. But she really wanted to see this movie, so Angie kicked it into another gear. She was only about 20 feet away from the platform when she felt something graze her right leg. She didn't stop to figure out what it could be. Angie swam faster. Then something grazed her left leg. 10 feet away from the platform now, she would be on the ladder in just a few seconds. Angie wanted to scream, but she knew that it would bring all kinds of unwanted attention and, for what, a couple of curious fish bumping into her. She smiled as she was within a couple of feet of the ladder. Angie could almost taste the popcorn. And Riverwatch Cinema popcorn was the best popcorn on the planet as far as Angie was concerned. Angie reached up, grabbed a ladder rung, and in a blink of an eye, she was pulled under. A few moments before, the creature was directly underneath Angie. She was swimming with a purpose. The creature extended a scaly arm and gently swiped at her leg with its webbed hand. Angie kept swimming. The creature swiped her other leg. She kept swimming. The creature was aware of the platform. Even if Angie reached it and pulled herself up, she would be no match for the creature. The creature darted ahead and positioned itself just under the ladder and waited a few seconds until Angie grabbed the rung. The creature grabbed Angie by both feet and yanked her under the water. She was so light and the creature moved her with no effort. Angie was literally screaming underwater. Her eyes were open, but she couldn't see a thing. She felt a sharp pain in the side of her neck, followed by the sensation of being wrapped in something slimy. The creature had enveloped her, and it was ripping at her neck and throat with razor-sharp teeth. Angie was dead. The creature pulled her along quickly to its nest on the other side of the shore. There she would keep while it went out to get more groceries. Billy reached the platform. He didn't see Angie. "Stop messing around," Billy said, trying not to be too loud. He pulled himself up onto the platform and walked around trying to see if she were hanging on any of the sides, waiting to jump up and scare him. All Billy saw was dark water, and his heart started to race. Should he scream out loud and wake up Sally and her rock salt, with Angie surely revealing her location before the shit show started, or would he just swim back to shore and wait out her shenanigans? He would go with the second option and hoped he knew his girlfriend like he thought he did. Billy dove into the water and began swimming. "They sure got quiet on us," Mandy said. Cecil smiled because that was okay with him. Mandy was laying in his arms, in her bathing suit no less, and they were stargazing together. You think there's something out there somewhere? Cecil asked. In the stars? Yeah, I'm sure there is. Too many possibilities for there not to be, Mandy said. She burrowed into the pit of his arm like a needy pup. I wonder what they look like. You think they have big brains like in that movie where they zapped everybody? Cecil pondered. Maybe, Mandy replied. She sat up when she heard someone swimming back to shore. They could tell by the force that it had to be Billy. Where's Angie? Mandy asked as Billy sloshed his way back to shore. I was hoping she was up here with you. I think she's messing with me. We raced to the platform and she beat me. But now I think she's trying to rub it in a little. But seeing as she ain't up here with you two, it might be time for me to worry, Billy said as he turned back toward the dark water. Come on, Cece, let's help him look. She's probably still near the platform trying to get us to crack and wake up Sally, Mandy said. But why would she do that? Cecil asked. To make a memory and be able to talk about that time we almost got tattered up with rock salt by Sally, Mandy replied as she followed Billy into the water. That's pretty fucking dumb, Cecil replied. I didn't say it was smart. Come on now, Cece, Mandy said, and waited until Cecil was beside her. They followed Billy back toward the platform. The creature had a membrane, much like an alligator that slid over its eyes when submerged. It slid open when its face broke the surface. It watched the trio enter the water. The creature submerged and watched them from below. It wasn't going to have to hunt for a while after tonight. The three of them climbed on the platform, one at a time. Mandy searched the edges like Billy had done not long before. Angie! Mandy hollered, holding back as much as she dared. This isn't funny! Get your bony ass up here, right now! Cecil and Billy listened for movement after Mandy's command. Cecil glanced in the direction of Sally's house to see if any lights came on. It was still dark. Damn it, Mandy said. All phones were on the beach because none of them were waterproof and they didn't think they would be in a predicament where they would need them. They honestly believed that Angie would emerge from wherever she was hiding and say the joke was all on them. Now, the realization of that not happening was setting in. Billy was walking around the platform. Mandy approached Cecil to say something when the creature burst up from the ladder and onto the platform. Fuck! Mandy screamed. The creature was tall, over 7 feet, slender, and a very dark shade of green. The gill flaps on the sides of its neck were pulsating. Its body was covered in scales and its hands and feet were webbed with claws as sharp as its teeth. And the fucker was fast. Before Billy could react, the creature grabbed him by the back of his long hair and slammed him to the platform before pouncing on top of him and ripping his throat out. It had even more groceries to collect. Mandy and Cecil didn't waste any time. They were in the water and swimming for all they were worth. Mandy was screaming as loud as her body would allow with every free breath. Cecil was ahead of Mandy. He heard the splash of the creature diving into the water. Cecil slowed so Mandy could get in front of him. Chivalry was not dead. Mandy glanced back. She saw light. The lights came on at Sally's house. Sally! Sally! Shotgun! Mandy hollered as much as she could while still swimming for her life. The feeling in Cecil's gut was one of hopelessness. He couldn't hear the creature, but he knew it was gaining on them, all the same. And it was so sudden. Cecil watched in terror as Mandy was pulled under in front of his very eyes. She was there screaming and swimming. And then she was gone. Sally! Sally! Cecil was now hollering. He heard a car moving quickly down the driveway out of Richardson's Lake. He heard the screech of tires. Sally had heard them. Cecil hoped like hell she brought the shotgun. Cecil was now in waist-deep water. He was fighting for all he was worth to get to shore. Cecil could see the towel he and Mandy were laying on not half an hour ago. Oh, no, 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 no! Sally screamed as she ran by the Jeep, shotgun in hand. Cecil was now crawling on the shore, almost completely out of breath. "Monster! Monster!" he said, pointing to the water behind him. Sally nodded at Cecil as if to say everything was going to be okay when she raised the shotgun. Cecil turned back toward the water to see where she was aiming. Was the creature behind him? Sally racked the shell and pulled the trigger. Cecil's head exploded like a watermelon with a lit cherry bomb inside. There was no rock salt in this shotgun. Sally took a seat in the dirt. She'd wait until the family secret came and gathered the last of his groceries. The law would find an abandoned Jeep, some empty beer cans. Sally would be sure to empty them all. And no kids. They'd half-ass drag the lake, ask her a question or two of which she would be clueless. You see, Sally was asleep inside the whole time. Oh, and Sally would be sure to point out the biggest rule of Richardson's Lake. No swimming after sundown. And that reminded her to fix the fence. I Was Hunted by a Cryptid in a Snowstorm by Michael Kelso. I never thought it would end like this. My truck's windows smashed, blood all over the interior, the frigid wind and snow blowing in on me as those two empty eyes stared in, like a predator sizing up a helpless animal for the kill. It didn't start out like that, of course. When I started out for my morning run, it wasn't even snowing. There was snow on the ground. There had been a quick storm with some squalls that left a half a foot of white stuff on the roads just a few days earlier. The state took care of it pretty quickly, and travel was barely interrupted. Everyone went about their merry way, even me. The fact that I hated winter even more than driving a truck never entered my mind. Okay, that was a lie. As I drove down the road, I found myself looking at the small piles of snow along the roadside and cursing them for not being enough to cancel my run. I had to drive my truck through some pretty empty places, the kind that made you long for anything to break up the monotony of 2 lanes of asphalt surrounded by endless trees. I had to drive that route quite often, and it never got easier to stay awake. I would even imagine seeing odd things looking out of the trees as I flew by. I knew it was my mind playing tricks on me, trying to scare me into staying alert and not crashing the truck. If it had been a deer or bear or something like that, I would have just laughed it off. But this thing looked like it was out of some nightmare. That's how I knew it wasn't real. There was no way it could exist, so I put it out of my mind and kept on driving. Fortunately, with it being a 2-day run, I was able to pick where I wanted to stay after I got my load. Hotels were nice, but if needed, I had the sleeper in my cab, which I called Home Away from Home. It wasn't so bad as far as cramped spaces go. There was lots of shelf space above the bunk. I had a TV mounted on the wall, which was hooked up to a GameCube. There was a DVD player with an assortment of movies that I rotated out on a weekly basis, and there were some paperback books, Lord of the Rings, Frankenstein, This Present Darkness, along with all the indie author books I had on my phone. I didn't have to worry about being bored. There was always my laptop that held the novels I'd started writing and never finished. The only thing I really needed was food and a bathroom. I had snacks stashed around, sometimes in places even I didn't find for months. But it couldn't compare to a nice hot meal. I had my favorite stops on the road, and they all had 2 things in common: good food and a quiet place to park and sleep. I didn't like having my truck squashed up against other trucks wondering if I would be able to get my door open if they parked like an idiot. I liked parking near the outskirts of any lot. It was more private, and I didn't feel as hemmed in. Of course, there was a trade-off. More privacy meant walking further to get to the truck stop, sometimes a lot further. But I used that to my advantage. Nothing like a nice long walk to get the blood flowing to all those muscles I didn't use when driving. Unfortunately, the place was a local mom-and-pop operation, which meant they didn't have the money to stay open 24 hours a day. Usually, I would pull my truck into my spot in the evening, go get supper at the lunch counter, then grab supplies for the night. I'd always go inside one last time to use the restroom just before they closed at midnight. That evening, I followed the same pattern. Pulled in, walked to the store, got some supper, and went back in around 11:30 for the restroom and supplies before going back to my truck and falling asleep. Normally, I try to keep a good watch on upcoming weather. For whatever reason, I hadn't that day. I woke up around 8 a.m. and looked out to a sea of white. It had snowed, and it had snowed hard. It looked like someone wanted to make up for the snow quota this winter and did it all in just 8 hours. I dressed in my cold weather gear and went out to see how bad it was and if my truck would be going anywhere today. When I jumped out of the cab, my legs disappeared. There was at least 2 feet of snow on the ground, and it was still putting it down. I trudged around the truck to make sure everything was okay, then got back in the cab, brushing off as much snow as I could first. I climbed into the bunk and turned on the news to the announcement that a major blizzard had hit the area. Wow, I thought. Wow, I thought. That is some great investigative reporting right there. They were calling for another foot before the snow stopped. Great, time to call the boss and get my ear chewed off. "Why can't you get here?" he growled. "There's this stuff called snow," I said. "It lands on the ground and piles up until it begins to impede travel." "All right, smartass. When do you think you can be here?" "Well, seeing that I haven't even seen a snowplow go by and I'm sitting in a parking lot that probably won't get plowed until much later than the highways, on top of the fact that my tires are nearly bald even though I've been telling you for months they needed changed, I'd say I have no earthly clue when you'll see your precious cargo." He was silent for a long moment. "Do you like your job?" he said through barely restrained fury. "Not particularly," I said, then added, "When the weather's like this, you might want to update your resume." With that, the line went dead. "Thank you for your support," I said to the no longer connected cell phone. I settled back in, turned off the TV, and went back to sleep. When I first started out in trucking, a fellow driver gave me a tip that I never forgot. Anytime you have a chance to get some rest, take it. That little tidbit helped me tremendously over the years. A little extra sleep means a lot less coffee. When I woke a few hours later and peeked outside, it was still snowing. I looked out my driver's side window, and even my tracks were gone. I was feeling the call of nature and decided to brave the elements to take the trek to the truck stop for some relief. I felt a little silly for putting on all my cold weather gear, including gloves and goggles. That feeling didn't last long. It was snowing so hard I couldn't even see the truck stop. I drew an invisible line with the side of my truck, aimed in that direction, and started walking. I never read Call of the Wild. I never saw Alive. Maybe if I had, I wouldn't have been so eager to throw myself out into this blizzard just to go pee. Trudging through the snow and the driving wind was growing old quickly. I felt like I should have reached the truck stop by now. I paused and looked around. Two realizations hit me at the same time. First, I couldn't see the truck stop. Second, I could no longer see the truck. As a lovely addition, my tracks were quickly disappearing. I tried to focus on my path toward the truck stop and begin trudging again. 15 minutes later, I believe by sheer luck, I saw the store appear off to the right. My track hadn't been dead on, but I was close enough to find the place. My winter gear was starting to fail me, especially with the wind finding all the little places it could to inject frigid air. As I approached, I breathed a sigh of relief at getting in out of the cold, not to mention a massive cup of steaming hot coffee. I reached for the door, but it refused to open. Maybe it was frozen shut. I pulled harder, but nothing happened. I looked in through the glass and saw no lights on. It struck me how the walkway wasn't shoveled either. Oh no, I thought. The storm has them stuck at home. My hopes for a nice, warm toilet and a steaming hot cup of coffee plummeted. I took one last forlorn look at the dark store and turned back toward my truck. My disappointment grew as I realized my tracks were gone. I was now snowblind and navigating without a compass or any means of direction. I tried to draw an invisible line with the outer wall of the store and hoped it would lead me back to the truck. I felt my cold, wet feet protest as I headed back toward the warmth of my truck. I hugged my jacket, attempting to keep the wind out. The snow was up past my knees now and seemed like trudging through mud. In retrospect, it would have been better for me to wait in the truck until I saw a snowplow in the parking lot. I had plenty of empty tea bottles for bathroom emergencies. But there was no use chiding myself now. I had to get back to the truck to keep this mistake from becoming a fatal one. If I got lost and couldn't find the truck, no one would come looking for me. They might not find my frozen body until the spring thaw. That was a cheery thought. As if my journey hadn't been hard enough, after a while, something caught my foot and sent me sprawling face first into the snow. I struggled to right myself and quickly wiped the snow from my face, silently thanking God that I had worn my goggles. I tried to get my bearings again, but curiosity nagged at me. What had I tripped on in the middle of a parking lot? I dug down and discovered the offending object. It was a parking space barrier. I chuckled for a moment until I realized to my horror that I should never have come near any of these in the middle of the parking lot. In fact, the straight trail from the store to the truck would have been a couple of dozen yards to the right, past the barrier I had tripped on. I scraped the rest of it off and saw it was running nearly parallel to my path. I had veered off course badly. The bright side was, I now had a point of reference and hopefully could correct my course. I looked around and found myself adrift in a sea of white. The store had disappeared and the truck was nowhere to be found. I took a deep breath and used the barrier to aim toward where the truck should be. I remembered one key fact in the process. These barriers lined the edge of the parking lot, and just past them was a drop-off. In retrospect, it was lucky I had tripped on it instead of stepping over it and rolling down a hill that I might never make it back up again. I turned to aim myself where I thought my truck was when out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a shadow of a figure walk by. Due to the blowing snow, visibility was almost impossible more than a few yards away. making it hard for me to be certain. It could have just been my imagination. I had been out in the cold for much longer than I planned, and it was time to get back to the truck. I was suddenly reminded why I got out of the truck to begin with. I had to pee so badly. I did a quick look and saw nothing but snow, so I whipped it out and let it go. I think whipped it out was a bit of an oversimplification. I fought to unzip my frozen zipper as my bladder screamed a full red alert that it was about to release the floodgates whether I was ready or not. I finally got it out and started the yellow stream when the wind shifted direction, sending it spraying all over my pants. I quickly turned so that the stream was downwind. When I finished, I looked down at the front of my now wet pants and swore internally. Yet another reason to find the truck quickly. Wet pants turned to frozen pants, turned to dangerous pants. I looked down at the barrier, now covered in flecks of yellow snow, and started on my new course. The snow had not let up one bit, and my energy started to wane, even though I had just been standing around for the last 10 minutes. Trudging through nearly waist-high snow was making me more tired than I had been in a long time. The wind rushing in my ears tore away my hearing. There wasn't anything out here to listen to, and yet I thought I heard something. I looked around, but only saw white. Was this my mind starting to play tricks on me like it did when I was driving, and thought I saw the creature that doesn't exist peeking out at me from the trees? I turned back to my imagined destination, wondering if delusions were the first step in freezing to death. As if to answer, the wind hit me with a solid gust, knocking me down. If I didn't know better, I'd swear I felt a giant hand in the middle of my back before I fell. I looked up and saw nothing but snow, swirling around, making mini tornadoes. I chuckled at the irony of them being called snow devils. I guess my own personal snow devil was pushing me around. I got up and started for the truck again. Every step felt like my feet were encased in concrete. I plodded on, trying to pull from whatever reserve energy I had to keep going. I couldn't die in the middle of a parking lot, just yards away from my nice, warm truck. That would be the ultimate irony. I walked on, barely conscious, wanting only my 18-wheeled safe harbor from this merciless storm. My head was down. I wasn't even looking anymore. It didn't make any difference. I knew I would never find it. I knew it was like looking for a needle in a field of haystacks. There was no way I would ever get back. I slammed into something and fell back. The snow was so deep I just lay there like a turtle, unable to get off my back. I looked up and saw the thing that had hit me was the back corner of the truck. 2 feet to the right, and I would have missed it. I smiled, but it took a lot of energy. I focused everything I had into getting up. Adrenaline took care of the rest. I marched up to the driver's side door and reached into my pocket for the key to unlock it. I couldn't find the key. I ripped off my glove and searched again. Still no key. Despair smothered my mind. If I had dropped it one of the times I fell in the snow, it was lost forever. And so was I. I leaned against the truck door. So close, yet so far. I could almost feel the heat through it. I smashed my fist into my leg in frustration, but felt more pain than I should have. I patted the other pocket and felt a lump. I tore off my other glove and reached into the pocket, pulling out the holiest of holies. The key. Tears streamed down my face and quickly froze as I stuck the key in the lock and opened the door. It took every ounce of energy I had left to climb up into the cab and collapse into the driver's seat. A wave of heat washed over me. For the longest time, I just sat there until I mustered the strength to start pulling off my cold weather gear. One piece at a time, I threw them into the passenger seat until I sat in my underwear only. I leaned my seat back and basked in the warmth that flowed over me like a wave from the ocean. I imagined sitting on a beach with the sun shining down on me and the water beckoning. I fell asleep like this. I woke to a sore back and stretched as best I could in my seat, then looked out the windshield. The snow seemed to have let up a little bit, and the wind wasn't nearly as fierce as before. There was still no sign of a plow, and there was no way I was getting anywhere without one. Off in the distance, I could almost see the outline of the store. I wasn't going there again until the parking lot was plowed, but looking around, I couldn't imagine how long that might be. There was at least 3 feet of snow already on the ground, and it was still putting some down. I crawled into the bunk and covered up for a serious nap. Hours later, I was starting to feel refreshed. I rolled over and turned on the TV, trying to see how bad things were. I couldn't even pick up the local station, so I stuck in a movie. After it was done, I decided I should probably take stock of my supplies, since I might be here for a while. I had plenty of snacks, chips, pretzels, and jerky, among other things. As long as I didn't binge, I should have been fine. I had drinks in the mini fridge too, but water wasn't a concern. All I had to do was bring some snow inside and melt it. I only needed to check one last thing to make sure I could outlast this storm. I looked at the fuel gauge. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the gauge again. I only had a quarter tank left. That might last, and it might not, depending on how long it took to get plowed out. Obviously, once the plow freed me, I could drive 100 yards or so to a gas pump. As I was looking at the fuel gauge, my eyes drifted to the windshield and the field of white that stretched out in front of me. The snow had finally stopped. How long that would last, I had no idea. I could finally see the store clearly, but I could also see clearly that it remained closed. It was hard to believe anyone would be plowing that amount of snow anywhere. I guess that's why they had the drop-off along the edges of the parking lot. As I softly chuckled at my realization, my eyes caught movement. There was some kind of animal walking around in the parking lot. At first, I thought it was a deer because of the wide horns on its head. But the longer I looked, the more I realized this creature was something else. It seemed bigger than any deer I'd ever seen. Its torso rode above the snow like it was a ship. Its face looked like it had wasted away to bare skull, and it had massive teeth that went far beyond its jaw. It was rather haunting to look at. It was sniffing around in the snow. The more I thought about it, I began to realize that was probably the spot where I had taken a leak. I was mesmerized and horrified by this thing at the same time. I was nearly convinced my mind was playing a trick on me when it looked right at me, and my blood turned to ice. Its look pierced my soul and made me wish I'd never come to this place. When it took its first step in my direction, I dove back into the sleeper and drew the curtain. I shook for reasons that had nothing to do with the temperature and was breathing in panicked gasps. What was that thing? Did I really see what I thought I saw? How could a creature like that exist? I tried to settle down and get my breathing back to normal, but my mind refused to let go of the image of that thing. It's just my imagination, I told myself. It's just a deer roaming around out there. I told myself that same thing over and over until my mind finally believed it. However, I didn't look through the curtain to confirm it. I didn't call it denial. I called it not pushing my luck. I pulled out a pack of cheese crackers and turned on the first Die Hard movie to try and forget about the deer outside. I was 15 minutes into the movie when I felt the first nudge. I didn't know what else to call it. It felt like something just nudged my truck. It was almost like when a strong wind gust pushed the cab. But I didn't hear any wind outside. The two sides of my mind engaged in a shouting match over whether I should check it out or ignore it. Fear threw its own 2 cents in, and ignore it won out. Until the second nudge. Actually, it was like the 5th or 6th nudge, until curiosity took over and made me go take a look. I peeked through the curtain and didn't see anything but snow through the windshield. I climbed out and looked through the passenger window, but saw nothing. I chided myself for my skittishness when I looked through the driver's side window and saw a set of horns. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but they were gone. There were tracks in the snow that looked like deer, only bigger. Or was that my imagination carrying me away again? I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the creature poking at my tires with its horns. I was fairly sure it couldn't puncture one with just horns, but I didn't want to chance it. I reached down and grabbed my club and opened the door to scare it away. But again, it was gone. I was beginning to question my sanity. Was this thing real? Was it my mind playing tricks on me? Or was the creature toying with me, drawing me out of the truck? I closed the door and went back to my movie. But I couldn't get that creature out of my head. I was on pins and needles waiting, listening, anticipating the next nudge. Before the movie was over, I fell into a fitful sleep. I was in a tall building, and there were bad guys everywhere. I had a machine gun, but had been better served hiding and picking them off one by one. I was sneaking up on one who was standing guard on an isolated floor when I turned the corner, and there stood the deer creature. It was massive, standing on its hind legs and its horns scraping the ceiling. It looked at me with those empty eye sockets from its bare skull face. It made a sound that was half grunt, half howl. Then started towards me. I backed away around the corner, trying to get back to my hiding space, but as I turned to run, suddenly the creature was in front of me. I pulled up my machine gun and started firing short bursts. I hit it in the chest, but it kept coming. As I backed away, I shot it several times in the head. I watched as chunks of bone flew, but it kept coming, as if it didn't care. I shot at its legs, hoping to throw it off balance, but it had no effect. As if it had had enough, it charged, pinning me to a wall with its horns. I looked down as the blood began to seep from my belly around its antlers. It pulled back and charged me again and again, sending shockwaves of pain through my body and crushing my spine. It pulled back and allowed me to fall to the floor. Blood pooled around me as I tried to crawl away from the creature. I could only use my arms. I couldn't feel anything below my waist. which was a partial blessing because it cut my pain in half. After I had crawled a few feet, I suppose it had enough of toying with me. It stomped its foot down on my neck so hard, I heard a snap, and my arms went dead. I could feel it tear into my back, ripping away pieces of meat. I could hear the sickening chewing and slurping as I was eaten alive. I woke with a start, sweat pouring from my forehead, and looked around the sleeper cab, trying to find the creature that was tearing me to pieces. After a few seconds, I came to the realization it had been a nightmare. I turned off my DVD player and stuck my head out through the curtain to check on my fuel situation. The needle was well below the quarter mark, almost down to an eighth. I looked out through the windshield, and the snow had not magically melted. In fact, the wind had picked up, and now it was starting to drift. There was once an even field of snow. Now there were peaks and valleys forming, like dunes in the desert. The store was still dark, and there was no traffic moving on the road. The sun was riding low in the sky, and I had yet to see another living soul. I wondered if my fuel would last until a plow could rescue me. Soon I would have to give some serious thought to conserving. It wasn't ideal. The thought of bundling up in blankets in the dark with no heater and no TV to watch wasn't exciting to me. But it was better than waiting until my fuel ran out, and I froze to death. As I killed the engine, I chided myself for not coming up with this plan sooner. I would have conserved fuel when the sun was out and the temperatures were higher. Now I was going to pay for my lack of foresight. I dug out every blanket I had stored in my closets and laid them over the bed, then tucked in for a long nap. When I woke, I was drowning in utter darkness. I panicked for a moment before I remembered where I was. I looked at my watch, and it was 4 a.m. I pulled the covers off me and was immediately assaulted by cold air. I grabbed a flashlight and found my way into the cabin. I turned the key on and waited with bated breath that billowed out in clouds that filled the cab until the engine turned over. As it roared to life, I felt even colder. I looked to my left and froze. My driver's side window lay in pieces on the seat and floor. I slowly turned to look at the passenger side window when fear grabbed me. There was a face looking in at me, but it wasn't a human face. It was the ungodly face of the deer creature that had gored me to death in my dream. A river ran down my leg, forming a yellow puddle on the floor as I stared into the dark, hollow eyes of this thing sent straight from hell. It reared its head back and then smashed into my passenger's window, splintering it. It reared back again and this time shattered the window, reaching in for me with its fierce, long teeth. I jumped back and landed in the driver's seat full of glass. I knew I was dead. There was nothing I could do. I sat there as it entered the cab, coming for me. Its head was halfway inside when it suddenly stopped. It moved around a little bit, then roared in frustration. Its horns were too wide to fit in the window. It tried over and over to get in, but there was no way it could fit with the horns. As suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. I looked around to see where it had gone, but the darkness of night covered it like a shroud. As I was looking, it silently reached in behind me and would have had me if it hadn't breathed out, warning me of its approach. I dove into the center console as its deadly jaw snapped shut right where my spine had been. It continued its assault on this window, gaining ferocity as it frustrated itself by not being able to get a hold of me. I stood in between the two windows, hoping I was safe from either direction. It was then I decided to go back into my bunk and close the curtain. I covered up and reached underneath the bunk to a secret compartment and pulled out my .40 caliber semi-automatic handgun. I took the magazine out and made sure it was loaded with all 10 rounds, then put it back in, pulled back the side, and flicked on the safety. It made me feel a little better, but not much. I didn't know how true my dream was or if bullets would do anything to this monster. I no longer had any illusions that this was a deer. It was something much more dangerous and terrifying, and it was after me. I covered up with my blankets again, holding my gun close. The heater wasn't doing much good with 2 windows broken out. I would try to do something about them in the morning, when it was light. There was no way I was doing anything in the dark with that thing lurking out there. I lay there for an hour watching every second of the clock tick by, eyes wide open, ears listening for any sound. But there was none. Just the wind howling in between the 2 broken windows, making my curtains flutter. Eventually, I recognized the futility of having a truck running and the warm air just escaping before it could even get to me. So, I got out of my bunk, keeping my new best friend with me, and slowly made my way out to the cab, my head darting left and right to see if the creature was about to launch itself through either of the windows. I turned the key off, and before I could pull it out of the ignition, a set of horns smacked against the frame of the window, and the deadly teeth came in and snapped just inches short of my face. I whipped around and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. It snapped at me again, and I panicked until I realized the safety was on. I flicked it off and aimed, but the monster was gone. I didn't dare make a move toward the window, for fear it would launch itself back in at me. I stood still as a statue and stared at the window it had come through, then slowly turned to the other side. I kept looking back and forth between the 2, trying to keep my peripheral vision on both at the same time. I was shaking, not only from the cold, but also from the sheer terror of not knowing where or when this thing was going to show itself. I decided my cold weather gear would be my best option, so I climbed back into the bunk and put on as many layers of clothes as I could find. When I popped my head back out, I was met with the most terrifying sight imaginable. The monster had climbed onto the hood of my truck and was now bashing its head against the windshield, trying to make its way inside. I knew the windshield was wide enough that it would be able to get its antlers inside, and I would be done. I pulled the gun up, aimed at its head, and fired. The explosion was massive. I instantly lost my hearing except for the ringing in my ears. I staggered back, but the monster kept coming. Not only had my bullet done nothing to the creature, it weakened the windshield, making it easier to get inside. The monster shook its head in surprise when the bullet ricocheted off the bone, and then continued its assault of the windshield. It hammered on the glass until it shattered into a million pieces. I was already aiming at its face and fired 2 shots before the glass even hit the floor. They both ricocheted off its skull, causing it to rear up just enough for me to fire 2 shots into its chest. It didn't collapse screaming in agony like I wanted, but I could tell it didn't like it either. It jumped down off the hood and disappeared. I stared out into the inky blackness, trying in vain to pick up any glimpse of it. I whipped around from one side window to the other and back again, waiting for it to show its horrid face. After what seemed like forever, I saw horns rising through the passenger side window. I fired a shot into its face, and it disappeared. I threw myself back into the passenger seat when suddenly I saw its head rising in the driver's side window. I fired a shot, making it disappear again. I jumped up and threw myself to the other seat, knowing it would be on the passenger side soon. Sure enough, 10 seconds later it appeared, and I fired another shot. It was toying with me. It disappeared, and I threw myself over into the passenger seat, waiting, aiming at the empty driver's window. But instead, I felt teeth clamp down on my neck. It had fooled me. I shoved my gun up under its skull and fired a shot. If I hadn't been deaf from the first one, this one right next to my ear would have done it. And yet somehow, I heard it squeal in pain as it released me. I knew I had been inches from death. I reached up and touched the wound on my neck and came away with a handful of blood. I went back into my bunk, tore away a piece of sheet, and pressed it to my wound. Then I tore some more of the sheet and tied it around my neck to hold the bandage in place. I went back out to the cab only to see it crouching on the hood, waiting for me. I never thought it would end like this. My truck's windows smashed, blood all over the interior, the frigid wind and snow blowing in as those two empty eyes stared in at me like a predator sizing up a helpless animal for the kill. It crawled in through the remains of the windshield. I knew I was dead. In desperation, I shoved the gun into one of its eye holes and squeezed the trigger. The sound it made was something I'd never heard before and never wanted to hear again. The scream was both a low guttural sound and a high-pitched shriek. It sounded like someone had unleashed a demon from the pits of hell. My mind screamed at me, "Get out of there!" I fumbled with the driver's door and ended up falling out when it opened. On a clear day with no snow, I would have gotten a concussion or a broken bone falling on the bare asphalt. With 3 feet of snow on the ground, I landed on a soft, cold pillow. It was the only time in the last 24 hours that the snow had helped me. I immediately jumped up and looked around for any place to hide. But there was nowhere. Everything was covered in snow. I glanced back at the trailer and realized the snow was so high that it reached the bottom of the trailer. I couldn't see underneath it at all. I quickly dove under it, then turned around and tried to pile the snow into the opening to hide where I had gone. I shone my light around at the beautiful sight of bare asphalt. I lay on my belly, gazing in every direction simultaneously to spot the monster's potential attack points. My breath blew out in billows of desperate smoke as I came up empty. There was nothing. The monster wasn't there. Yet. I didn't dare hope to imagine that my shot had killed it. If anything, it had made it even angrier. It was probably destroying the inside of my truck at that very moment. What I didn't trust was that the monster wouldn't find me underneath the trailer. I looked around for anywhere I could use as a better hiding place. My eyes fell on the wheels of the truck. It looked like there was just enough room between the tires and the differential. It would be a tight squeeze, but it was better than that thing finding me. I turned around and slid my feet in first. The further I slid, the tighter it got. Ironically, the grease and oil from the differential helped me slide through a little easier. When I almost had my shoulders through, it suddenly felt too tight. I was stuck. I couldn't move forward or backward. Panic flooded my mind and I struggled frantically like I couldn't breathe. After the longest minute of my life, I finally managed to maneuver my shoulders through and into my hiding spot. The hood of my coat did double duty of keeping me warm and completing my hiding place. I lowered it to the level of the asphalt and would raise it just an inch when I wanted to look out. The first half hour was the worst. The ringing in my ears had begun to subside, but I still didn't hear anything outside of my own breathing. The cold slowly leaked through my clothes. Still no sign of the monster. Another hour passed. My muscles started to cramp up. Still no sign of the monster. Another hour. I felt like my bladder would burst. Still no monster. During the long boredom in between, I pulled the magazine out of the gun and counted how many bullets I had left. No matter how many times I counted, it always came out the same number. 1. I knew one bullet wouldn't save me from the monster. There was only one thing I could do with one bullet. End my suffering, if it found me. I took it out of the magazine and stared at it. I used my coat to shine it up, then stared at my reflection in the gleaming brass. The edges of the snow around the trailer began to glow. I knew the sun was coming up. Darkness was no longer my friend. I was about to give up and crawl out of my hiding place when I heard it. A soft, sniffing sound. I lifted my hood an inch, just enough to peek out. And there it was. Its head had broken through the wall of snow close to where I dove under the trailer. There were a few drops of blood from my neck wound, and it was sniffing them. These drops would lead it right to me. Sure enough, it took a turn toward the front of the trailer and looked in my direction. I lay there still as stone as it inched its way toward me. It was having trouble squeezing its massive body under the trailer, and I could hear it growling with frustration. It came closer, crawling right toward me. There was no doubt it knew I was there. I closed my eyes and stuck the barrel of the gun under my chin. I felt its hot breath and smelled the stench of death as I squeezed the trigger. Suddenly it shrieked, and I could feel the truck bucking above me. I opened my eyes to the most amazing sight. Its horns had gotten caught in the chains hanging down underneath the trailer, and it was tangled. It screamed and bucked and fought to be free from its metal captors. It yanked backward so hard I felt the truck move sideways an inch. The differential was pressing on me now, and I had to shimmy over to avoid being crushed. I watched as the chains broke away one by one, and then it was free. I took the opportunity to crawl out from under the truck. It was useless as a hiding place now. It had already tracked me there. I was almost out when I heard another sound and saw a shadow pass by the other side of the truck. It was coming back, but it was trying from the other side. I crawled as quickly as I could. This was my chance. If it searched from the other side, it might not know I had left. I had no idea where I would go, but it was better to be out of a useless hiding place. Besides, I desperately needed to stretch and pee. As I stood next to the truck, I saw a large patch of red in the snow. I guess shooting it wasn't as useless as I had thought. I took care of business first, peeing before I ruined another pair of pants. I finished and thought about where to hide. I looked up at the ruined cabin of my truck when the nightmare crept around the corner. I stood there, helpless. It had caught me flat-footed. I had nowhere to go. It stared at me as it limped around the corner. Its empty eyes seemed to exude rage. I pulled up the gun and aimed, when it disappeared into a moving mountain of snow. The snowplow had finally arrived. I watched as the plow pushed its mound of snow past my truck and over the edge of the parking lot. The driver backed up and stopped beside me. "You been here all night?" the driver said. "Since before the storm." "What happened to your truck?" he said, looking up at my shattered windows. I followed his eyes and thought for a moment. "Someone tried to rob me," I lied, knowing the truth was unbelievable. "I see you took care of it," he said, looking at the gun in my hand. I looked down at the pistol and stuck it in my waistband. "It's been a hell of a night," I said. "Well, don't worry. The roads are getting cleared and I'll get you plowed out of here." "Thanks," I said. He nodded and backed up to continue plowing. I looked at where he had just plowed beside my truck and saw a long smear of red. I followed it to the edge of the parking lot and looked over the side with my hand on my gun. The drop-off was a good 10 feet or more, and the snow had already started to pile up. I followed the path of red down the hill with my eyes and saw antlers poking out of the snow. I stared at them, looking for any movement. For 10 minutes I watched, and they didn't move. I was interrupted when the plow pushed another pile of snow over the side, covering the antlers. I watched for another 5 minutes, just to be sure. The plow guy pulled up beside me. "You okay?" he said. I pulled my eyes away from the snow pile. "Yeah, I'm good." "You sure?" he said, pointing at my neck. "Yeah, I just got nicked by some glass," I said, remembering the teeth of the monster clamping down on my neck. "Well, I think someone just pulled into the store," he said. "Maybe you should go get something for that." "I will, thanks," I said, knowing I would do no such thing. I wanted to avoid as many questions as possible. I climbed into the cab, brushed the glass off my seat, and drove over to the fuel pumps. After filling up, I started the long trip home. I kept my cold weather gear and mask on, having no windows or windshield made for a frigid trip. The heater was on max, aimed at my feet, keeping the bottom half of me warm. I didn't call for a tow truck because I desperately wanted to get away from there. I never went back to that truck stop ever again. I didn't want to take the chance that that thing was still alive. I never told anyone else about the harrowing encounter. I wish I could erase it from my mind. As I drove towards my home terminal through the endless stretch of trees, I saw one of the creatures peeking out at me that I used to think was my imagination. Now, I know better. Well, my spookies, you've made it to the end of 5 horrifying and hair-raising stories. So all that's left to do now is make your way home in the dark. Be careful, watch your step, and mind any bushes or trees, because you never know what's lurking behind those leaves. And remember, if you love what we do here at Weekly Spooky and you want to support us, head to weeklyspooky.com/join. For as little as $1 every month, you get 2 bonus episodes and over 5 years of creepypasta readings and exclusive audiobooks. That's weeklyspooky.com/join. I'll be seeing you all very, very soon.